As you see, there's a seat spare up here, and I believe that there's somebody in the room now who's willing to take up that seat. Can we give a big Dundee Socialist Labour welcome to Jeremy Corbyn?
People that are going through a hard time and show support and solidarity. And I want you tonight to send a message, if you would, to an FBU member, Andy Adams, critically injured in an incident in Clydebank yesterday afternoon. A firefighter looking after other people, trying to protect others, as is his job, as is his responsibility, as is his mission in life. And he's critically injured and in hospital now for looking after others, like many, many other members of the FPU and many, many other unions do. Can we just send him a round of applause tonight? And I want to say a big thank you to all of you for coming along tonight to this meeting, because having public meetings is important. Having an opportunity to discuss politics on our terms rather than those set down for us by our elders and betters in the media industry is important. And this is the, I'm losing count, but I think it's the 36th or 37th public event we've done in this leadership contest. They've been all over the country, every major town and city, and many of them we held in the open air, and they're even bigger than all the events we held last year. They are a way of reaching out to people, just as much as live streaming them onto Facebook and social media is also a way of reaching out to a lot of other people. These things don't happen by accident. They happen because, look around you, look around the hall, look around all those that have volunteered and helped organise tonight's event and all the other events all over the country, because they are determined that we will decide our politics, we will decide our priorities, we will decide the issues that we want to discuss and debate, and how we bring about a more decent, more equal, more humane, more just society all over this country. That is what our campaign is about. But it's also about being inclusive of many people and many ways of communicating. And it's really great that tonight at this event we have music. I want to thank Maeve, Simon and Stephen for the great music they've already given us tonight. And I was talking to Maeve last night about the way musicians are treated in our society. They are workers, just like every other worker. So when you invite a musician to come along and play at a social event or anything else, you'd pay if you invited somebody to come and do the catering, pay when you invite a musician as well. And later on we'll be hearing from Bethany, who is wonderful, and I was totally moved by the singing she did at the funeral of the late great Davy Hopper in Durham a few weeks ago. Davy tragically died only a week after the incredible Durham Miners Gala that he organised, the big meeting that was the biggest there had ever been up to that point in modern times. Davy died a week later, and we're very, very sad about that. But we've resolved in his memory to make next year's Durham Gala, second Saturday in July, the Durham Big Meeting, the biggest ever. It's not impossible to get from Dundee to Durham. They both begin with a D. So if you can get along there, you'll have a wonderful day, and you'll see the spirit, not just of the mining communities that might have lost their pits, but have never lost that spirit of solidarity of the mining community and all the other struggles that join in there in Durham. So in Davy's memory and in solidarity with all of us, try and get along there if you can. Now then, the other issues that we face are how we understand our own past and our own history. This city gave us John Strachey and his book, thank you for that, gave us so much trade union solidarity, and also gave us a lot of comics over many years. It's all right, it's a joke, I'm allowed. But it's also about the history of other people, and so I was just given, as I came onto the stage, a photo and a memory of Caroline Martin. Caroline Martin, who is buried here in Dundee, and there is a building named after her in my constituency. She was a young woman who died at the age of 29 and was a socialist teacher. She didn't start off as a socialist, she became a socialist from her experience of looking after poor people in London, and dedicated her life to travelling around the country doing public meetings and speaking engagements, sometimes doing 10 or 12 a day in different villages across Yorkshire and across Scotland. And she became ill whilst addressing public meetings here in Dundee and died and was buried here. The Trades Council have made sure her memorial is properly looked after. And I think it's important that we remember the contribution, the hardship, the struggle, the sacrifices that were made by those to convert people to the ideas of socialism, of social justice, the ideas of sharing and protecting our natural environment rather than just exploiting and becoming wealthy at the expense of others. And so when we mount this campaign, which at one level is about the leadership of the Labour Party, we also in memory of all dream of putting anybody's money into the hands of a bookie. You might say that's an unwise decision, Jim. And people came and joined together because they wanted something different. Just over a year ago, in May 2015, Labour lost a general election. I was sad and devastated by that. Labour lost an awful lot of seats in Scotland at the same time. That loss was devastating. That loss was tragic. We had a manifesto that had good things in it, no question about that. But fundamentally, there was a problem with what we were putting forward. The fundamental problem was that we were, on the one hand, saying we'd improve this, this, and this. We would build housing, we would try to improve the NHS, we'd improve adult social care, all of which are very, very important. But the problem was we were accepting an agenda which at one level froze public sector wages, in reality a wage cut, because any level of inflation therefore reduces the real incomes of those people, but also pledged to making continual cuts in public expenditure. It's as if the banking crisis of 2008, which was solved by our generosity as a public in giving £385 billion to the banking industry, was then being paid for by cuts in public expenditure, local government expenditure, central government expenditure, all of which impacted disproportionately on women and entirely on the very poorest all across the UK. We were not putting forward anything sufficiently radically different that was going to encourage young people to vote with the idea that they would have a much better future, or other people to vote on the basis that their public services would be saved and developed if there was a Labour election victory. And so we had a hard lesson to learn. We entered this contest with the leadership because we wanted to oppose the whole notion of austerity, which falls on the poorest, falls on the most vulnerable, rolls back the role of public services in our state and our society. And so we put that case forward, and as you know, what the result was. We won that election. It wasn't about me, it was about we. It was all of us that won that election last year. And in winning that election, I consider there was a mandate then to change economic policy. And so I was very pleased when John MacDonald was appointed as Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, immediately set out the fundamentals of a different economic policy. An economic policy where you don't cut your way to prosperity, you grow your way to prosperity by investment. You don't cut that affects the poorest in our society. You don't destroy local government. You don't destroy the life chances of a whole generation. So John set out a very credible, very serious, very intelligent alternative economic strategy. And you know what? It's changed the whole economic debate. It's changed the whole notion of the way an economy can and should be run. That's the first thing we achieved from that victory last year. The other is about the issue of the Welfare Bill Act, as it now is, that was going through Parliament at that time. Labour MPs were instructed to abstain on that vote. Now, we were instructed to abstain because we were told that since we'd lost the general election, we'd therefore lost the argument on welfare. Well, I don't like using the word welfare. I would much rather use the term social security, the security of all of us, rather than a donation from the state in a welfare payment to those that needed it. Well, we're not doing that anymore. We are now opposing the government's changes to the welfare state. We are now opposing them, and we did succeed in defeating them. But a year ago, we were abstaining on a 12 billion cut in the benefit system for the very poorest in our society. Later on in the year, we managed to defeat them on the issue of working tax credits, and we shamed them into withdrawing their disgraceful proposal to take away personal independence payments for those with severe disabilities. That only happened because we were united in achieving that. And so, when the EU referendum came along, and some people decided to resign from the shadow cabinet and turn the whole thing inwards on a party debate, I regretted that. I regretted that because I think we were missing a huge opportunity, and there was therefore a challenge, and there's now another leadership contest. In this leadership contest, we're taking the campaign to every part of the country. We're developing policy ideas, and I'll come on to that in a moment. We're including more people than ever before in party membership and in political activity. And if you judge anything by growth, then surely some credit is due to the 300,000 people who've become new members of the Labour Party in the past year. And those people, all of them have joined for lots of reasons, but fundamentally because they want to see politics done differently. They want us to challenge the economic narrative we've been fed for most of the past 30 years. That's the neocon agenda of retreating the role of the state in public life, of encouraging great riches amongst a very small minority, allowing a pool of poverty and unemployment to exist at the other end, and say to every young person, I'm really sorry, I got free university education, I'm going to get a good pension, I've got somewhere decent to live, I'm really sorry, you're not going to get any of these things, and goodness knows what's going to happen to your children or grandchildren. Why do we have to accept that the economic thoughts of Milton Friedman and the right in the USA in the 1970s that was so devastating to public services in the USA and many parts of Latin America and other parts of the world, imported here by Margaret Thatcher and the right of the Tory party in the 1970s, should still be of some economic relevance? Surely to goodness, now in the 21st century, with all the technology advances that have been made, all the understanding there is about the need to share wealth rather than concentrate wealth, we can't, as a party, be capable of offering something very different. Well, I tell you what, now we are. And so, in this campaign, there are many, many policy ideas that we want to develop. But we also want to develop how people do politics and how they're involved in it. And so later this year, we're going to be holding an economic policy conference on how we can develop the economy in Scotland, how investment can take place, how part of the £500 billion National Investment Bank that we're proposing could and should and must be spent in Scotland, what the infrastructure needs are, what the manufacturing industry needs are, what the green energy jobs are, what can be achieved when the imagination and the skills of everybody is unleashed from a straitjacket of top-down policy making, top-down decision making and top-down instructions. When you liberate people's minds, give them the space and the opportunity, anything is possible. And a society that thrives on inequality cannot itself be a particularly healthy society. And when we're told that somehow or other this is all a bit of a strange aberration, our party has now the biggest membership of any socialist party in Europe, and it's still growing. And I want it to grow even further, because when we're a very large organisation and very large party, we're not just a door-knocking election machine, important as the door-knocking during the 3-4 weeks of election campaign obviously is. We're also a campaigning force within the community at all the other times. And when people are empowered by their own achievements in the community, they begin to see how the empowerment of people can do things very differently. Take, for example, the health service in our society. I'm always in wonder of those that manage to campaign for successfully and eventually achieve a national health service free at the point of use as a human right for everybody in this country. If you read the pamphlets delivered after the Second World War by the government on what the National Health Service would do, they're quite amazing. That was a time when, yes, there was austerity of a totally different sort. The austerity was that they wanted to restrict luxuries in order to invest in necessities. What we seem to be doing now is destroying necessities in order to invest in luxuries. It's the wrong way around. And so that National Health Service, free at the point of use, that National Health Service, free at the point of use, has achieved a great deal, but it has massive health inequalities to deal with. There are two in particular. One is the life chances, the life expectancy, basically is less the poorer you are, less the worse your housing is, less the area in which you live if it's a particularly low wage area. That has to be addressed by investment, it has to be addressed by better health services, it has to be addressed by better housing. And then there's another one, and that is the mental health crisis that's facing the whole of the UK. 1 in 4 of us in our lifetime are going to go through some form of mental health stress. We can get help, we should get help, we shouldn't have to wait for that help, because in waiting for that help, sometimes terrible things happen. One of the biggest killers of young men in this country is suicide amongst them, because they've been isolated, because they didn't necessarily get the help they should have done, and because there's a sort of macho culture that you don't talk about mental health and stress, you leave that to somebody else and at the same time make jokes about it. Well, no more of that. Let's do two things. Behave differently, all of us, ourselves, but also invest in the services that are necessary so nobody waits excessively for the help they desperately need at a point of crisis in their lives, and don't discriminate them against them in job opportunities or anything else later on because they've been through a mental health crisis in their lives. Let's just join up again. What we also have to do is deal with the funding issues. They are different in different parts of Britain. They are different in their intensity and their form, but fundamentally what the new Labour government did in 1997 onwards was decide that it could fund public services through the private finance initiative, where you would get a hospital or a school apparently free as a gift from the private sector, and you would enjoy this new building and you could turn up and attend its opening and be very excited by it. The problem was, in effect, in many places, schools and hospitals became tenants of publicly owned buildings, and the payment levels are absolutely astronomical. It would be like buying a house on a credit card. You wouldn't actually do that if you were being sensible with your money. And so we want to end the whole idea of PFIs, take them back into the operation of the Treasury, so no longer is every hospital or every school that has a PFI penalised for decisions that are made in the past. Instead, they can actually concentrate on what they ought to be doing, which is caring for patients and teaching children. That would be the priority. That policy we launched in London on Wednesday. Diane Abbott, our Shadow Health Secretary, and I launched that document. And today we had a lovely event in Edinburgh as part of the festival to launch a document, a consultation document on culture and how we approach the idea of inclusion of arts, culture, music, dance, poetry, literature, painting in the lives of all of us. Give every child a chance to learn music, every child a chance to develop their imagination, and every adult the opportunity to continue their enjoyment of cultural opportunities. So we don't restrict it to those that can afford to go to good quality music. We don't restrict it to those parents that can afford to send their children to private stage schools or anything else. We instead recognise the cultural industries are something we value. They're of an economic benefit, but they're also of a massive social benefit. Bring people together in a cultural experience. You brought them together for lots of other things as well. It's in our DNA, it's in our psyche. Let's be proud of it. Let's put money into theatres, into libraries, into music, into art, into culture, for the good of all of us and the generations that follow. And so what we're doing is putting forward policies on many, many areas. I've just mentioned 2 or 3 of them today. There are grotesque levels of inequality in Britain and terrible levels of payment and employment of people. And so, amongst the 10 points we put forward are about employment law, are about rights at work, are about ending the indignity of 0 hours contracts, are about ending the minimum wage for young people, which is so far below a living wage, it becomes gross exploitation. And ensuring that apprentices are properly paid and properly trained in all the apprenticeships they undertake. I realise there are differences in different parts of the UK on higher education and further education, but I simply say this: if you restrict access to colleges, if you remove the support for young people to go to college in the first place, they're not going to get the opportunity to go to university unless their family is wealthy enough to help them to get there. Every child deserves a decent education. Every young person must have the opportunity for good quality training, good quality apprentices, or good quality access to university. Not just for them, but for all of us. A better trained, better educated workforce is good for everybody, and if there's a good engineer looking after our car, our train or our plane, we're all safer as a result of it. There's a public good in educating everybody. The final point I want to make is this, on our approach in general. Our approach in general to justice, to human rights and civil rights within our society. I mentioned Orgreave, I mentioned blacklisting. This government is now proposing to repeal the 1998 Human Rights Act, which includes the European Convention of Human Rights in its wording and the case law with it. We will oppose them on that. I want us to be part of a human rights community that recognises the universality of the right to assemble, the right to join a trade union, the right to free speech, the right to practice your faith. If we walk away from international human rights conventions, we're in no place to condemn anybody else for the abuse of human rights within their society. And I want a foreign policy, an international policy for our party, an international policy for our party that doesn't go down that terrible road we went down in 2003 when we invaded Iraq and were ignorant, or perhaps not so ignorant, of the obvious consequences of what has happened there. And so I want a War Powers Act so that Parliament has to vote on any deployment of British troops anywhere in the world, and we promised during the leadership campaign last year we would deliver an apology for the invasion of Iraq. We have done that, and I think the Chilcot report is a disturbing document for anyone who cares to read all of it. It is very long, I fully understand all of that, but it shows a process, and a dangerous process, that was followed at that time. Surely, if we want a world of peace, we have to work for that world of peace. We have to have a government that's committed to trying to achieve nuclear disarmament. We have to have a government that's committed to promoting decency, peace and justice, and greater levels of equality and environmental sustainability around the world. What we want for ourselves, we want for everyone else. We achieve these things when our communities come together. If a community blames the nearest minority for the shortage of housing, the waiting list at the doctors, the oversized class in the school down the road, you decide it's the fault of somebody because they're of a different nationality, they're a different ethnic group, they come from a different part of the country, or something else, what do you achieve? You achieve a lot of anger, you achieve a lot of bitterness, you achieve a lot of dislocation, and you achieve a lot of hatred. But you know what? At the end of that, you've built no school, you've trained no doctor, you've got no new teacher, nothing has improved. The only thing that's changed is community relations and solidarity have got worse. But when you do things together, when you campaign together to get a better school, to protect your hospital against what a Tory government might do to it, when you do things together, you win, you're stronger, and you go on to achieve things very differently. This campaign is about uniting people. It is about bringing communities together. It is in the great labour movement traditions of solidarity. It's also about saying to everybody, are you comfortable living in a country where there are people sleeping on the streets? Are you comfortable living in a country where some people live 10 and 20 years longer than others because of the poverty they don't enjoy? In other words, those that are wealthy. Are you comfortable with any of that? No, I don't believe any human really is. Our campaign is about challenging power, is about seeking justice, is about bringing people together and uniting them. And so this campaign is doing all of that. I want us, obviously, to win this campaign. And I want our party to recognise in winning that campaign, we've turned our backs on the economics of injustice and inequality. We have set our face towards a future of justice, a future of greater equality, and a future of better prosperity for the next generation. We don't want to leave any community or any part of the country behind. It's what's made our party so strong and so bold. We thank those that have gone before. We thank those that are working with us now. Let's deliver for all of them and for the next generation. Thank you very much.